Is the stream ready? Or should we wait? Okay, I'll just do the introduction again for the sake of the team. Sorry, for the sake of the stream. Hi guys, what's up? So, welcome to the Open Quarterfinals of NDC. Congratulations to all teams for making it this far, and best of luck. My name is Chito. I will be your chair for this round, coming from De La Salle College St. Benilde. We have an amazing panel with us today, comprising Christopher Chua, Michelle Hu, Miko Kano, and Vance Esguerra. These panelists are also welcome to send in their speaker positions in the chat. Gender pronouns in the chat, likewise to all speakers as well. So, assuming we're all ready, let's call on the Prime Minister.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hold on. Sorry. Let me...
Okay, is this better?
Yeah, you're good.
Hello?
You, Deccan?
No.
Is your Discord muted?
People hear me.
Yeah, you're audible.
Hello?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Hello? How about now?
Yeah, you're clear.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
No one responded. Okay, can't turn on cam because, there are many people here and there's a problem. Okay, whatever. You guys in chat, please. And I will start speaking in a few seconds. Opening the chat. Okay, sorry. I will actually start now. Every day, people die of preventable health problems because they have no organs, to help them survive. At the same time, people are buried with the organs that could help others, with the wealth that could help the poor. But because we prioritize their wishes and feelings over the right of others to basic life and health, we allow so much preventable harm and death. This is a result of our prioritization of the wishes of the dead as opposed to the actual living conditions of those who are still here. Our stance is that the rights and the wishes of those who are deceased are not as important as these living conditions of those who are alive, and that these issues should be decided upon by those who are living and most affected by these issues. So this will obviously depend on the specific request, and I cannot come up with a policy for every scenario. But for example, the burial request should be handled by the family or those who control the land where they want to be buried, or how the state can redistribute money of extremely rich billionaires to the poor, allocate it based on necessity, giving social welfare programs to those who need it the most. It doesn't mean that you'll be starving, right, or homeless when your parents die. That is a part of necessity, and the state has a responsibility to ensure that people have proper living conditions. And obviously, as I flagged in my example, we should take people's organs. They don't need them in their coffins. We can also put work to close off loopholes to prevent people from bequeathing wealth while they're alive, to make sure it is redistributed in a more equitable fashion. Two arguments: one, why the rights of the living are not as important, are much more important than those of the dead, and secondly, how their policy results in intergenerational inequality that makes life worse for everyone. Argument: rights of living versus dead. The first level here is, what is the basis of human rights? One, they are given based on the ability of the actor to appreciate those rights. So, if I slam the table, that is not abuse, because that table never had an ability to feel pain and feel suffering in the first place. So therefore, a corpse who does not have these emotions and not experience suffering cannot be deemed as important as someone who can starve to death, who can experience the immense torture of hunger or health problems when they do not have an organ. But secondly, when you have a commensurate responsibility that you were giving in exchange for getting that right. Meaning, if you have money, you're probably working for that money. You're paying tax on that money. You're experiencing the effects of an unequal society because you have that money. And therefore, even if you gain some benefits, you are giving up some sacrifices to make it an equitable transfer of rights. And therefore, it is justified for you to do this while you are alive. But when you are dead, you do not do any of these things. You do not give any responsibility back to society. And therefore, you are stealing money, stealing organs from people who do need it the most. But secondly, what is the basis for restricting rights? We say the state can restrict rights when there's a compelling state interest to do so. And we'd say in this case that all property, or even your organs, are derived from the state's enforcement of rights. You cannot have money, property, or burial choices if the state has not been enforcing an ability for you to have those rights in the first place. They protected you, they kept you healthy, they gave you clean air and properly working streets. Only because of these benefits of the state were you able to be healthy and have those organs, and therefore the state has a right to take these away from you, the point at which you are not providing a better society anymore. But under this, we'd say that these things are merely wishes related to emotions people have. But we say the state must prioritize the physical and concrete benefits provided by money, by organs, because these are more important as they are prerequisites to having any emotions or feelings on their side. So we agree, maybe some people will be sad. This is not as important as the fundamental right to life that is prevented by people hoarding money and organs. The last principle here is that humans are fundamentally equal. The birth lottery, right? As much as possible, your fate in life should not be determined by what people before you have done, because you recognize the individual choices and humanity of someone to make their own destiny while they are alive. But we'd say upon death, people likely only prioritize their family, their loved ones, people they personally knew in the past. We say your family members are not as important as the poor, as the people who might die tomorrow because of a lack of organs. And therefore, it fundamentally goes against the state's principle of making sure people have a basic right to living conditions, the point at which we only prioritize the families of those who had a lot to give away in the first place. We say because the state believes in some semblance of equality, we must enforce this principle. We will not have a perfect society, but at the very least, we are more fair to people who have not been born yet, who are young, as opposed to only prioritizing those who have lots to give away. PY from CO.
So it seems to me that there are many people who don't fall into your categories of rights. Disabled people, brain dead people who can't appreciate the suffering that's happening to them and arguably don't give that much to society. Do they not have rights?
These people are human. I will say when you were dead, you were no longer human and therefore you do not fit under this category. Second argument, inequality. Intergenerational wealth results from people giving their money to people who they like very much, your family, your friends. This results over time in hyper concentration of the wealth, a snowball effect. Your heirs get money, they use that money to make more money because you need money to make money. And this money can be used to manipulate political institutions and fundamentally change the structure of society, the point at which you have so much money you're able to massively influence other people's actions and decisions. You can change laws to benefit you and you actively gain from other people being poor. Because the benefits of money come from the happiness when you have money and someone else doesn't. Your money is only powerful insofar as someone else doesn't have it. And therefore, over time, the richest families in the Philippines and in the world have an incentive to make sure no one else has the same amount of money and power as you do, to make sure they are able to have as much control as they want in society. So their policy actively prioritizes the most powerful who have had time to accumulate wealth and power in the first place. This is bad because these are not people we particularly care about, given the massive amounts of benefits they already enjoy in society today. We'd prefer to benefit the poor, people who have not been born, the people who might experience the much more drastic consequences of these social problems. But in addition, these people simply do not deserve these things. The fact that you get $1 million because your parents happen to be rich, there was no commensurate work, and therefore the fact that we allow the system allows a massive injustice when people, this is theft. If you have this money, you are stealing it from people when you had no right to that money in the first place. But secondly, the effects of our policy are much better for the economy in general. We say, one, the fact that it's more equal means that people are less likely to have massive social problems caused by inequality. How the rich can cause climate change but not have to care about the consequences because they're protected by their wealth. We'd say on our side, they have an incentive to care about the poor, to stop climate change because they will be affected too and they cannot protect themselves from these devastating consequences. Two, no to hoarding. The fact that people will spend the money while they're alive instead of passing it on to your children is good for people's jobs. When you put money into business institutions that will affect people now, this helps actively people go out of poverty when money is injected into the economy. But three, if people have money upon death, this can be redistributed to social welfare programs. And when more people have a basic standard of living, they're able to contribute to the economy. They're able to have an education, get jobs. It's good to have a country where people don't die at the age of 12 because they had a terrible disease, so they'll be able to live life and contribute to society in the first place. So to make sure the basic well-being and living conditions of people are fulfilled in the future, we should have a more equal society and not allow the hyper-concentration of wealth in a few elite families. For all these reasons, UPD proposes.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Call Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi. Pronouns they, then POI voice. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah?
Alright. I'm preparing my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let's first clarify what the alternative would be in the case of government side, at least for like in the instance of assets and properties. What we would say is that on either side, interstate succession will still exist. This means that the state can decide where all your assets go in the instance that you failed to provide a will before you die. And in most instances, like in the Civil Code of the Philippines, this go to your parents, then your siblings, then the children of your siblings. This exists right now, but only applies fully when the dead did not leave any will before they died. But right now, we still have testamentary successions, i.e., while you still have 50% of the successions allotted for your family members, you can freely decide where to give the other 50% of your assets and properties. And we're going to argue later on why the protection of those testamentary distributions are things that should be continued to be protected legally, because it is principally just and morally good and equitable for the person who died and for the person who are likely to inherit from those things. This is likely to be true panel. This is likely to be a true alternative, because states cannot function without some semblance of order as to succession, for example. So on government side, interstate succession will still exist. The harm is the person cannot decide where to give their properties. The first thing I'd like to discuss is why it's principally just. I have two discussions under this, and most of my responses will be directly integrated. One, the right to property is an inherent right recognized by states and international conventions, and this applies primarily for testamentary distributions. It is you that worked hard for your assets and your properties, and it is you who had to grind through years of college and through multiple obstacles along the way. This should continue to be recognized for the simple reason that you made the decision when you were still alive and you were still conscious when you made that decision. This easily takes down Prime Minister discussion because you are not Prime Minister discussions that because you are not consciously there anymore, then those rights no longer exist. I think this is just absurd, because even in death, dead people still have the right to dignity. They still have the right to be buried properly. PM was closely devaluing the value of life of a human and the decisions that human made before they died. And we have to question, why do people leave wills and testaments in the first place? They do so because they want their assets and properties to be left in good hands and to the people whom they actually care for. So the alternative of interstate successions is harmful because you are forced to give up your assets to people whom you may have lost ties with. For example, you may have left your home from a young age because your family hates you for being gay, for example, yet interstate succession takes away your agency and distributes your property to your parents first, then your siblings, then the children of your siblings, and so on. Testamentary successions or distributions are better because while there is still a certain threshold for interstate successions, you have the ability to freely decide where to distribute the other half of your assets that you worked hard for. So, it is just principally just because it is not the state that worked hard for your assets and for your properties. It is you as an individual that worked hard for it, and you made a decision when you were still conscious and you were still fully conscious and able-bodied. In meta, this means that government devalues and removes the agency of the person who died. We would argue that the right of that person, even if they are dead right now, are still valid because they made the decisions before they died, for example. So the second thing that I'd like to discuss here is that it is a form of equity. Why? And this is where I specifically talk about the things like burial requests and organ donations. First, let's talk about burial requests. What we would argue is that it's inequitable for same-sex couples, for example, not recognized by their states. If you look at the vast majority of states in the world, most do not legalize same-sex marriage or recognize same-sex marriage like in the Philippines. So for example, if your partner dies in the Philippines, you do not have the legal protection to handle the burial activities and processes of your partner, aside from the fact that you can inherit from your same-sex partner. For example, this means that it is principally unjust when you have no legal protection for the wills of the people that died, because most of the time the states that we're talking to, the vast majority of the states that we're talking to, do not recognize these things which are viewed to be like taboo or not socially good by most of the states in the world, for example. So again, it's inequitable because it harms those same-sex couples, for example, from accessing not only the properties of their partners, but also from processing the burial activities of their partners. And it's just morally bad because like if you look at the many situations in the Philippines that I have personally encountered, many same-sex couples cannot like actually like tend to their loved ones when they died because most of the time their family members pushes them away, and the family members have the legal protection, the sole legal protection, and the same-sex couple do not have the rights to all these things. The second thing I will discuss is that on organ donations. The first thing I like to do is that it is untrue that these people who dies likely wished for their organs to be donated to their family members or a random person who may not have a complication at the end of the day. And this is where I directly respond to Prime Minister because they said that we need as much organs as we can. But I'm going to argue that it's unlikely that they are going to give this like arbitrarily. What we would say is that by virtue of necessity, these people would likely donate it to organ donation facilities, to hospitals, to institutions where that action and decision would actually have impact. And why is it better on our side? Because the individual who died can decide where to donate their organs. On government side, they are more likely to donate it to their immediate family members because they're likely to be more self-interested by virtue that there are a lot of people deciding where to give those. For example, your parents want to donate it to some person or some relative, for example, your siblings want to donate it to a hospital, for example, and it's far harmful because it will likely lead to like that organ, for example, not being donated to the people that actually need it the most. So therefore, in the instance of equity, it is better for people like the same-sex couples, for example, and for like organ donation. So before I proceed, QI from OG.
Do you deserve to die because you did not have enough friends who had sufficient organs?
No. I think that's just disingenuous. Because again, I have proven to you that when people choose to donate organs, they do it out of necessity or by the perception of necessity. And of course, they will donate it to like donation facilities, for example. Again, it's unlikely they are going to donate it to people who do not have any complications. So again, there's still utility from the things that they are going to do. The last thing I'd like to discuss is that why it forwards social order and social cohesion. The thing that I'd like to discuss here is that it prevents unnecessary conflicts between family members. Like if you look at the Philippines, for example, without legal protection for the wills or the testaments of the deceased, for example, you have family members like literally killing each other for a piece of land, for example, like what happens in most of the rural areas, for example, like family members and friends literally kill each other off just to have the piece of land, for example, in that specific farm area of their family, for example. So therefore, on our side, you forward social order, you forward social cohesion because you allow that dead, for example, to be able to have the wishes to be legally recognized before they, even after they died, for example. And I think this is precisely the reason why most people like who have properties, for example, have us ample amount of property, decides to have wills and testament because they do not want to see their family, they do not want their family members to be destroyed, for example, just because of some property or just because of some land or some asset at the end of the day. At the end of this debate, where we are able to prove to you that it's principally unjust because the right to property is an inherent right. But secondly, we're able to prove to you that it is morally equitable for like same-sex couples and in terms of organ donations. But lastly, we're able to prove that it's better for social order and cohesion. Proud to win this debate.
Thanks, Alo. Call on DPM. Here.
It's just a second. So the first thing I want to say is that the attack of opposition on the alternative does not deal with the entirety of PEP's case. The case was just not that like there are ways in status quo if you do not write a will. The case was that a lot of people write their wills in incredibly arbitrary ways, incredibly unfair ways, that your friends, because they were your friends, don't inherently deserve to have a yacht as both a poor person having a loaf of bread simply because they are friends. We would say these basic necessities trump the comfort and the subjective feelings can probably be satisfied in other ways or can be satisfied through other money or your own money. Those are probably more important things compared to what opening opposition said. But also, we would say that why do your families have a greater right compared to people who need it more? That is the case line that came from PEP, and there was absolutely no response to it. They said that it's your property, but it does not respond to the argument that property derives only from the state. It does not exist in a vacuum, and therefore it is perfectly justified for the state to use it and means the good for the public and not just good for your family. They said that we don't get to do that. There are 3 reasons that's not true. 1, the state has an interest in reducing inequality and oftentimes makes very big interventions in succession in the first place. The fact that they can seize a lot of your inheritance as a form of taxation. The fact that oftentimes the standard of being effective is incredibly pervasive. There are many people lobbying for these things, and the state is likely to hear them out, listen to them, and distribute it on the basis of necessity. So we think this is likely to be able to be something that the state intervenes in. It's much more efficient. Even if you just deprive people of this kind of money, it is much more going to be successful, given that the state does not take into account your private interests, but the interests of all of society. The next thing they say is that you worked hard, and therefore it's incredibly important and good that you're able to do things with this money. 1, you're still given the opportunity to do that when you are alive. So we think commensurate to the time where you're able to feel pain and access pain, you're still able to enjoy the benefits. At a point where which you die, you lose claims on that kind of thing. Honestly, like, people who did not work for it also do not have claims on those kinds of things. And we would say the clearest and cleanest alternative standards is things like necessity, which is precisely why we want the state to intervene in the first place. The next thing we get is, in a POI from CO, why is this not similar to disabled people? And here's a distinction we have to make. Even disabled people or people in a coma can, 1, they're still alive, but 2, they can recover. They can wake up, and it's precisely that kind of hope that makes us treat them differently. But when someone is dead, we're pretty damn sure that they're dead. So clearly those are not analogous situations. The next thing they say is that, same-sex couples will be discriminated because reasons. The first thing I would say is that, 1, there is also an equal, I know we're liberals, but there is also an equal right claims of your family who also love you, who also raised you up as a person, who also developed emotional ties that are also equally valid and also equally painful when someone dies. And it is arbitrary to say that one emotional claim is better than another. But 2, we would say that the state has a particularly good ability to balance these kinds of claims. And rather than only deferring to the wishes of the deceased, they're able to balance both interests and say, for example, have a ceremony for your family and then have a second ceremony for your partner. Those are the kinds of interactions that the state as a disinterested party is capable of making, rather than only having the subjective wishes of one person. So I don't think they have the right to make your family suffer because you didn't like them. Lastly, they just don't respond to the pragmatics of like our case. Look at the large redistribution of wealth that only happens on our side of the house. Look at the millions of people who die preventable deaths precisely because of this lack of organ donations. They said that the majority of people donate their organs anyway. That is just laughably untrue. Why are there so many people dying because there are, not enough organs? That's clearly not true, and probably because of subjective reasons that you care about your body, you find it weird to donate your organs. But 2, even if it were true, we would say they don't donate their organs in the most equitable or most strategic ways. They donate it to a charity that they like, not necessarily the one that can cater to the most people or the one that needs or the areas that need it the most. We would say when the state is taking a bird's eye view of this problem, they're much more able to effectively reallocate it. Lastly, we also give alternatives for the dead. You can enjoy it during life. The state is not going to actively hate your family. They probably are still going to get a house. They probably are still going to get some level of things based on the same principle of necessity that Pep gave. In fact, it's much less likely to be explicitly biased to only one side of the family compared to a single person who probably has their own subjective and sometimes unjustified reasons for hating people who genuinely care about and whose happiness the state still has an interest in caring about. Lastly, let's go into extension. So I will assume but not concede that there is legitimacy to the interests of the dead. I would say that the actual process of writing a will is likely to not represent their interest, and the state as the actor that is still conscious at the point of their death is an actor much more likely and much more capable of adapting to changing contexts. If there is a POI from either team, I will take one.
Sure. So to clarify, if the state cares so much about these living people, why did it set up the protections in the first place? Like, there's like a huge gap where for some reason the state is super corrupt, but also will do all the nice things you're saying.
I mean, it is super corrupt precisely because of the existence of these mechanisms in the first place, precisely these intergenerational wealth transfers. So obviously, if you erode that over time, it is much more difficult to do that moving forward. So there's clearly something that's happening on your side, but something that changes on our side of the house because you've removed the largest incentives that drive it. So let's talk about the process of writing a will. We say it is likely to be incredibly unnuanced to your actual interest at the point of death. 1, we don't like to think about death. So you probably put like something incredibly vague or something incredibly not really well thought out because of the natural taboo around thinking about death in an incredibly deep and meaningful way. Two, you're likely to simplify it, right? So it's likely to most people don't expect to die tomorrow, so they put very little thought in it. They just have a will for the sake of having a will. Three, a lot of people don't touch it for decades. Like you might accidentally still have your ex-girlfriend as a beneficiary, even though that's not something that you still consider in status quo. We would lastly say that people can actually be quite vague about how these things happen. The family disputes that opening opposition mentions happens because everyone is fighting over one word in a will because no one can really, seance and ask a dead person what they actually meant when they said that word. It's incredibly difficult to actually approximate the interest of these people. What is our comparative? One, I would say that the state is much more aware of present conditions. So they're not making a decision based on what you thought about decades ago. They're looking at about the needs of people who are important in your life and the needs of society as a whole now, and it's much more likely to be timely. But two, the needs of families and the people around them can be adjusted in time. Maybe your priorities changed because you died. Maybe the fact that you weren't expecting to die means that you wrote it in a way that was meant for like 30 years in the future when you meant for it now. That is something that the state can also take into consideration because obviously the people who care about this person are going to be lobbying. It can find some sort of neutral way to decide these kinds of things. We would say in the worst case, you do not want to burden those who are about to die with the pressure of having to cater to these succession disputes, having to constantly have families try to lobby them and fight them. We would rather the state that is not in a emotionally stressed out position makes these decisions on their behalf precisely because of the trauma that opening opposition argues that it will cause. OG.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Call on Diallo.
Am I audible?
Yeah?
Okay. So, hi, my name's Gio. My pronouns are he and him. If you have any POIs, just raise them through this, but don't badger me. I have a timer and I'll start my countdown. Starting in starting in 3 starting in 3, 2, 1, and go. Man cannot even guarantee dignity in life and rely on the whims of fate to be merciful to us, to birth us into privilege and care. How terrible then of OG to rob us even more of the dignity to choose our own. What's the goal here coming from opening opposition? It's clear prior to their death, i.e. when they were alive, i.e. when they had the right to personal agency and bodily autonomy, which I think all teams can reasonably concede and that any living person has, because as OJ has told you that these rights only apply to the living and they do not apply to a dead body. And I'm going to discuss to you later on why this is not actually the case, but we have to value the importance of a living person making these choices prior to death and why their autonomy still matters at the end of the day. Firstly, let's go to my responses, and my constructives and responses will be integrated with one another. First, let's go to the first response to OG's model. OG's model says that they are a solution to systemic injustice and better seek the welfare of society and the public healthcare system, and so on and so forth. A few responses to this. Firstly, OG has only proved that their model is, to some extent, capable of helping improve the healthcare system or solve organ inequity or organ lack or deficit, for example. However, it does not prove that this model is a necessity for solving such injustices and that this model is the only way that we can resolve these issues in the public healthcare system, for example, and the lack of organs, for example. OG fails to prove that every other avenue for voluntary organ donation has been exhausted, and the only way to get organ donors is through this policy. Because what are the alternatives that exist? And I think OG was conveniently forgetting. Firstly, it's to foster a culture of organ donation through the education system, for example, teaching children and people that it's okay to donate your organ after your death, willingly and voluntarily, because it helps people. Or making healthcare providers inform their patients more about the option of giving their organs and donating those organs to people who may need it more. There's a second alternative here of allocating a greater budget to the public healthcare system in the first place to prevent the worst case of so many people needing organs or their diet that OG asserts and doesn't actually prove is that big of a problem. Because I think that the model here coming from OG is sticking to a niche case and blowing it up like extremely to such big proportions so that this is the greatest problem that we have to face. But I think this case, it's clear that there's a problem-solution mismatch occurring here where OG offloads the issues of state failure and the inability to provide better access to quality healthcare. Moreover, OG still fails to weigh this priority over Brian's argumentation on the equity that to provide to people that are not privileged enough to like be granted like the rights over like the dead, for example, like when we talk about queer couples, for example, when we talk about children who have been disowned, for example, and who lack access to the legal system to like grant them autonomy in their deaths. I think that OG was unable and unengaging in this frame, and that's why we think that this argument does not stand. Second response on the idea that the right to autonomy is a right afforded to the living only and does not apply when you're dead. Firstly, you made this choice and these wishes when you were alive and you had agency. This is only a delayed action through a middleman, but it is still your action through your own agency and your own volition nonetheless. Para question this, when you punch someone, do we say that it is the fist that hurt the person you punch? Is the act not ascribed to the person which the fist belongs to? Similarly, the contract or your immaterial soul or the attorney is not the one actually calling the shots when you're dead, when you have your will and you tell people that this is the will, this is how you want your like body to be taken care of how you want your assets to be distributed. It is the now deceased but then living individual with property rights acting when they impose their wishes with the middleman as a logical extension of their self, as a logical extension of their agency. Assuming that these wishes are disingenuous coming from like OG, for example, and uninformed is an argument in bad faith and is unengaging. OG has failed to prove why this is the likely scenario that all the people writing up their wills are like going to be deluded like in death, for example, are going to be negligent about their wills and their testaments. And even if we concede that state has absolute control over property and has the right to redistribute it, remember, panel, that this necessitates state providing a proportional exchange with the people that it takes away this property from. Like, for example, the state paying you if a part of your land is used to build a road, for example, if like a part of your house is like broken down because they have to build a new highway, for example. Government does not have a mechanism for equivalent exchange and cannot promise this coming from closing because that would be installment policy. Because under their model, there are no legal protections for these people. There is no equivalent or at least proportional exchange. The state is getting you something and acquiring your property, like the dignity of your body, without actually giving anything to you at the end of the day. But before I proceed, yes, POI from CG. If no, CGOG.
When the rich can hoard wealth intergenerationally and use their power to lobby the government to prevent social health care programs from being implemented, which they have incentive to do so, how do you ever fix these social problems?
I don't understand where you're trying to tell us that somehow by making people donate their organs that we fix the problem of wealth inequity and wealth inequality. I don't think that solves the problem of like us not taxing like the rich even higher at the end of the day. It does not solve the problem of corruption. There is no logical link between your model and the like benefits that you want, the conclusions that you want, because it's such an overblown case, it's such an hyperbolic case at the end of the day. But let's go to my last response on the idea that a dead body is worth less than a living person, and that we should be valuing the lives of the living over like these like dead bodies because they are like do not matter at the end of the day in the eyes of the state or in the eyes of the people. This argumentation coming from OG only operates in a society which devalues the physical body and sees it as an entity that is distinct and lesser than some immaterial soul that is lost at death, that the value of your body is lost when your soul leaves it when you die. It does not take into account that there are a multitude of people and cultures that consider the body itself as equally sacred and equally valuable as the soul. So when government tells you that this model is going to like improve like the problem with the healthcare sector, for example, and that people are going to jump for joy because it helps us to redistribute these organs to people who need it. It does not take into account, coming from their model, the principal objections of people who do put and ascribe value to the dead body even after you have died, who ascribe value into your organs, for example, or into your wishes. What are the implications to this call-out panel? That their model operates in an idealized world where people do not care about what happens to their body, but secondly, that their model is principally unsound at the end of the day and does not actually offer a clear principle justification to why we should value the life of a person, the living, over the dead bodies at all times, in all situations, in all cultures, when clearly there are cultures that like protest and do not disagree with this type of framing at the end of the day. So for these reasons, for the firstly on the idea that the model of OG fails to prove like their necessity and that they are the only way that we are capable of improving like inequality and inequity, for example, in the healthcare system. And secondly, also on the principal value that this dead body is in fact something that we should be devaluing and that we should not be considering, and that the wishes of the people who used to own these bodies are not something worth listening to. We think that in Death with Dignity, it's better to side with opening opposition. Here.
Thanks, DLO. Call on number of gov. You're here.
Hey there, am I audible?
Yeah, very clear.
All right, thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Isa. My pronouns are she and her. If you have any POIs, do it through chat. Again, POIs through chat. Hold on, I'm just gonna get my timer. All right, I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, all of my rebuttals will be integrated. Let's move on to like a few key pieces of like housekeeping before anything else. Firstly, I think the wishes of the dead are incredibly individualistic, right? And the nuance to legal protections are afforded to those like who are dead, right? Is that they can't necessarily be undone, meaning the dead can't regret who they left their but on the converse, they can't complain either, right? I mean, it's a contract that is never fully consummated. So even on a legal standpoint, right, this becomes justifiable. Just if you're talking about contracts, for example, and the like. But even if it is consummated, insofar as their wishes are realized, there is still no guarantee that it would produce the intended effect. So for example, if you leave property to the next in kin, it doesn't mean that it would be taken care of. For example, if you bequeath companies to your children, like Logan Roy did in Succession, it doesn't mean that they will succeed, for example, etc. This means that the wishes of the dead may not be as beneficial, even if they are legally protected. Second bit of housekeeping, therefore, about OO's case, about proportional exchange and things like that. I think looking at the state's power of eminent domain, I think this can also apply, like the same principle can apply over bodies, for example, over assets, so on and so forth. Because if their families, for example, can still have the same benefits, can still like have certain trickle down benefits, for example, like welfare or being able to benefit from better governance, so on and so forth, better products, better trade, so on and so forth. I think they can still enjoy these types of things. But thirdly, and to better answer the POI from CO, I think laws evolve, right? They have to reflect the current needs of society, and that's why it's okay that laws can change over time. That's okay that assets can be seized, your bodies can be used after you die, so on and so forth. But lastly, right, in good faith, why is the state the best arbiter? Three things. Firstly, obviously they have the interest and responsibility to do this, and I think it will be like within the range of what is acceptable action. They're obviously not going to use arbitrary standards. So for example, if you had like a perfectly good body, you won't donate it to like a cancer institute, for example, or vice versa. I think these types of things are going to be incredibly nuanced, right? And they will have specific standards. They will consult people, so on and so forth. B, I think they're obviously going to have the interest of the majority of people at large, right? So they're obviously going to try to allocate resources as well as possible. But C, I think there's so many other ways for you to hold the state accountable, so on and so forth. Like there are already pre-existing legal mechanisms in status quo. I think even if you're talking about that, if the state does like have this huge infringement, then obviously you have things like class action suits, which will become more effective. I'll take that later. To my extension, therefore. So I think if legal protections are given up, it then becomes the state's responsibility to do what they believe with. Like it's like, with regards to like resource distribution, right? I think it's likely to be aligned also with the wishes of the deceased, right? And this is something that OG never proved. So, but even if it isn't within like their rights, for example, or why it isn't going to be aligned with their beliefs, for example, I think it's like it's still going to be geared towards like the common good, for example. Because since time immemorial, right? People have always been in pursuit of progress. I think if you're talking about human contribution, the current perception is that it only happens when we're alive, because we go to work, we pay taxes, we forward our own advocacies, etc. And maybe if we're lucky, we leave behind legacies. But not all of us do have legacies, but we still do deserve to be able to continue to contribute to society after death, regardless of that. So why are we still likely want to do this, or likely want to contribute to humanity even after death? And this is where we characterize the disease in a much fairer way than the opening houses. Because as a person, there are three things that you are. A, I think you do have the shared goal of humanity, and also by extension the state, right? That you still want to leave the world a better place than you left it, right? That's exactly why we're doing everything that we are right now. That's why we're debating, we're having discourse, even about certain topics like death, for example, and so on and so forth. But B, I think that's exactly like what the deceased wishes do, right? They want to make the world a better place for their families, for example, or maybe for the scientific community, etc. But allowing the state to take over this, for example, would be magnifying the effects of that tenfold. I think this trickles down to those who otherwise would not have benefited from this, right? But C, And this is where we brought in the stakeholders. For example, let me paint like a very clear picture. So for example, like no one's like, for most of the people who can afford to leave legacies, maybe like they were legitimately self-made, right? They weren't like nepotism babies. They started from nothing but worked like super hard over their lives to be able to create empires. I think this means that they truly do understand the necessity for state redistribution, because obviously they still do want to help the people as well. Look at how many of them have like foundations, for example, charities, programs, etc. But like conversely, for example, even if you just suffered from a rare chronic illness and you still wanted to like be laid to rest, but your body could help the scientific community at large, you understand the necessity for that. But even if you are like an average reasonable person, like most of us are, then maybe the reason why you want to be buried, or the reason why you have certain wishes, for example, is because it's custom, for example, to be buried, right? But maybe if the state decides to cremate you and turn you into a tree instead, I mean, if you are alive, you would think that was fine, because cemeteries take up such a large and unusable chunk of land on Earth, for example, and this could be like your way to help mitigate climate change, so on and so forth. Listen, I think this is just the logical next step to be able to contribute to humanity's progress and be able to affirm your lifelong commitments by making like the ultimate sacrifice, for example, or like the ultimate commitment to that. This is important because this is where we reimagine human contribution, extending past death in a way that is more equitable to society. But before I continue on to my second extension, I'll take OO for engagement.
The state protects your individual rights, like you have the right to speech, the right to expression. Even if they may not have social utility, it is valuable on its own because we don't live in an authoritarian world.
Yeah, and we already conceded to that, but we already made the distinction that certain laws have to evolve and certain laws have to be able to be done for like the common good, for example, especially knowing that these people would have likely consented to it anyways, as I just spent the last, 3 minutes building. But secondly, therefore, what is the next logical step in humanity's collective ethics? Therefore, what happens after legal protections are like gone, for example? Firstly, I think if people know that their wishes may not be honored because like legal protections don't exist, then they're likely to do what they wanted to do after death when they're alive. I mean, caveat, obviously this only exists for things like donations, creating foundations, like tying up loose ends, etc. Because, for example, if people are like, I think people who have companies, people who can leave legacies, are less likely to do things like hoard wealth, because they're like more likely to become philanthropists and not just like donate 3% of their wealth after their death. Because knowing like you will not have wealth when you die means that if you have goals of retaining your legacy, for example, or helping people, you're more likely to do that now because you're still able to reap those benefits, unlike after you die. But conversely, what happens to your family after, I think you can still pass this on, especially if it's already like a time-honored legacy, so on and so forth, right? So I don't necessarily see how exactly a lot of people will be adversely or negatively affected by this. But for example, even if you're talking about normal people, I think they're still able to do things. For example, you can try to split land before your death, for example, instead of leaving it to everyone after that. You're still likely to be able to bequeath heirlooms, for example, etc. Therefore, this means that humanity will start to think about like the end of your contribution to humanity stopping when you die, and rather being able to forward that even past that. So this is where we mechanize rather, where you're better able to have like intergenerational change, for example, that is more equitable. What are the structural reasons to prove this? And like the best one is for the fact that people obviously have respect for each other. I think even without legal protections, even before the laws existed, we had things like cultural practices of indigenous people. These things have existed since time immemorial. They have honored certain wishes with regards to death without these legal protections. And even if you try to parallel those like time-honored requests, for example, with legal protections, I think this just goes to show that humanity's like collective disposition towards death can still evolve, and this is just the next step for that. Because obviously, what we want is ultimately anthropocentric in nature, and this is how we best assure that. Thanks.
Thanks, MG, Colin, Emma. You're here.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take POIs in chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Closing opposition will advance 3 very basic claims. The first is that, in direct clash to opening government, this entrenches inequality by using a fundamentally unequal instrument and taking away a basic liberty to restrict that inequality. That secondly, we will make a very basic principle claim. Dead people have rights. And number 3, we will also advance that you can retroactively avail of these rights while you are alive. Argument number 1. Here I will also respond, obviously, implicitly. Their claim in opening government is that rich people control the state and use that power to centralize money in the hands of these rich people. And the solution of both OG and CG is to take away the legal protections of dead people and then profit. Somehow money will magically end up in the hands of all the poor people. The wishful fantasy is that removing a system of a broken state removes the already corrupt in the broken state. When I don't think it's fair for DPM to say, oh, we'll erode it, and then somehow magically the instrument will fix itself. We think this actually entrenches inequality and will go past opening opposition. All OO says is we can do other things to solve it. We say this makes things actively worse. This happens in 3 ways. Number 1, the vast majority of states are captured by the elite, e.g. the wealthy people with inheritance, are the same people deciding how this money is spent, which means that these are the people who can now decide where the money goes. So what happens is now people can siphon the saved up wealth of the poor and the middle class and centralize it for the uses of the elite class, which is why if their concern is about rich people using money and lobbying the government, guess what? They still get to do that, but now they have all the money of all the dead people and no families ever get to save up. That's the first point. The second point is that inequality furthers because greedy rich people need legal protection the least. Legal protection is an instrument used primarily by the weak and the vulnerable who need the availability of the state in order to protect them from people trying to take their money. So what happens is that on opening government or in closing government's world, rich people can still hire lawyers to delay and inconvenience the state like they do with every other thing that doesn't award them legal protection, but they still are able to protect themselves through other methods because they are rich. AF cannot say, oh, we'll just fiat out loopholes, since literally no government in the world has been able to successfully implement such a policy to remove loopholes, which is why when greedy rich people have less legal protection that doesn't actually harm them, what it primarily does is takes away the liberty of the poor. So the third and last thing is that this also means that states are far less efficient at spending money, which means even if this is just about the direct utilitarian good, every level of state bureaucracy siphons money from what could have potentially been directly donated, which means that you also have far more money and utility being lost through the state instrument that, as they say, is fundamentally unequal. Which means if this debate is about an unequal state that is opening government's problem, they make it worse, which is why we are unwilling to support this policy. So again, we go further than opening opposition by showing it's not just that you can do other things, but that this makes things worse and extends that inequality. Lastly, I also want to make a comment. Opening government and closing government run sort of the same response when they say, oh, wills were arbitrary, oh, people would want to do this anyway, which I think underscores how easy their problems are to solve. If it is so easy to change what people want, oh, they would have consented to this anyway, we don't need to force people to do these things. And I want to take the example of organ donations to really cap off why opening government and closing government are dead. Opening opposition will be dead because of our extension. But the reason for why they're dead is because organ shortages were mostly solved in countries that instead of forcefully taking everyone's organs, made donating the default option. There are plenty of methods available to states if these wills are so arbitrary that it's not actually that hard to do so, to solve for things like the redistribution of money. So if their problem is easy to solve, it's even easier to solve in closing opposition's world. This is the pragmatic extension, and the reason for why it's debate winning is one is because it takes all the harms of opening government and says if they have it, it gets worse. It takes all the harms of closing government and shows why it's magnified. But in addition to this, it is also far more logically prior to the responses opening opposition runs. I can sense OG is molding, so I'll take one from Pep. Go. Go
so
through it.
you're not comparing. States still need to appear to be democratic and care about everyone, even if they're not perfect. Compare that to a rich person that can shamelessly only care about their children, because that's literally the right that ops model gives them.
Hold on, you're shifting premises here. Earlier, you said rich people can lobby the state, and these are the people the state is primarily accountable to. And now you're saying, oh, they have to be to some degree democratic. If they have to be to some degree democratic, then the second line of response in this first argument applies, which is that if you can do this in so many other arbitrary ways, why do you need to force people? So this really is the crux of the debate. Opening government and closing government are dead. Secondly, I also want to introduce the principle here. And here I will first advance the basic claim, no, I won't take a POI from you, that while they were that dead people are rights-holding beings, we reject the core premise that rights are only granted to those that can appreciate them. Since rights are a construct given to human beings and you're still human after you are dead, it is arbitrary that your heart stopped beating now and not at any other time. And the reason for why is because like the intuition, we don't allow people to desecrate your corpse, even though it is technically not harming anyone. Rights don't go away once you stop feeling harm, which is why when we POI them, they say, oh, it's because you're a human. Precisely. But why do you stop being a human once you're dead? If you are dead, we believe you have the right to own property and distribute that property because you are a right-holding being, not only because other people believe you should have that right, because rights are socially constructed, but also because you remain fundamentally the stuff of human even after your heart arbitrarily stops beating. That's the first principal reason for why you hold rights. The second reason for why you hold rights even after you're dead is because the way we treat you after you die affects your well-being when you are alive. This is the analysis needed to credit opening opposition's argument, since they say, oh, you have some religious rights, and oh, you made this choice while you were alive, but why should we respect these rights after you are dead? The reason for this is because people who are deeply religious, people who want to protect their life's work, labor intensely in life to control their debts after they're dead, and they feel the desecration of their corpse before it has even happened to them, because the violation of the right to freely practice their religion while they are living and to act recklessly to people's bodies after they die is a harm to them while they are alive. So when OG asks us the question, should we let some people die? I say yes. You wouldn't force a Muslim or a Hindu to eat food that is against their religion to keep them alive, because of the basic reason that in the pursuit of the good and in the pursuit of truth, you cannot force people to violate their own conception of the good life or of the true life. Which means when they say, oh, the state donates to the common good, that common good is created by the individual conceptions of people on the ground, and the state cannot assume that for people, which is why this is fundamentally a moral wrong and government bench is morally bankrupt. Finally, just some preemptive responses to the preemptions that they gave, since they did give some. One, they say, oh, the state gave this to you so they can take it away. No, the state gave it to us on the back of our labor. We did not receive it from them as a gift. We took it from them through votes and through lobbies. Secondly, they say, oh, people experience a lot of harm when they're dying from not having enough organs. Yes, but people also experience a bone-deep harm when they know that the state will not respect the rights of their body and they will go to hell after they die. Lastly, they say, oh, it's never legally consummated from CG. This is just like not weird. Like, this is a weird point because it's legally consummated when the will is fulfilled, like when your body's cremated. So it is legally consummated. This contract is fulfilled. So at the end of this second argument, after the first principal argument that wins the debate, the second principal argument wins the debate because it is principally killer. It shows even if living people don't matter, what matters is that these people have rights even after they are dead, and furthermore that we should respect these rights. So the entire point of opening opposition is that we should care about their choice. We're the only team that proves this actual framework of rights applies to these people, and that's why closing opposition should advance.
Thanks, member of opposition. Call on government whip. Here.
Hello, just confirming if I'm audible.
Yeah, audible.
Okay, thank you. I'll just get my timer and then I'll start my speech. POIs through chat, I might be taking one. Okay. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Some of your families take too long to let go that it takes them 10 years before they can spread your ashes in Malibu. Your wish to be donated to someone you know, even though a stranger needs it, or a part of your land must go to the eldest and the other, even though that person is not willing to take your property, or someone who's willing to work on it better because they need it, is not mentioned. These are clear demonstrations which leads to the idea of how even under the legal framework of our society, the dead cannot be subjected to a certain level of accountability, or that not all of their decisions are sane, which they cannot improve or they cannot be prosecuted for if it's something wrong. The dead has already died. That's why we think that the shifting of the collective and the society is way more favorable when we don't have legal protection for this. The rest of the rebuttals would be integrated. Why does their extension independently win the round then? I think coming from Ate Isa, we characterize how often the wishes of the dead are individualistic, that we ought to always be protecting them at the line of respecting them for the legacy and what they are as a person if they ever work so hard to have it. We distance ourselves from OFG and we say how when you die, the community must come next, that the state can better arbitrate, better considering the context and the situation you are in the present. When you know how congested some cemeteries are, or how there's an influx of organ donation that's needed, that not all the time they must be followed, especially when they already died. We don't think they deserve legal protections anymore because their wishes could along the way be broken for more important reasons that's relevant to what we face as a society, and the burden now is we answer who can best arbitrate for them. And while we do agree how these families could either have backlash with some of these testaments, there's also disagreement upon them that we can't constitute the best thing to consider distribution in a manner that even if it's not favorable to their wishes as a dead, it's favorable to the kind that's still alive today. Now, we're in the debate of prioritization. If none of the openings sufficiently proven that, then they already lose in this debate. Our issues that I will integratively discuss, one is where is society better off, but who's the best arbiter? But there's this huge discussion on the better person to arbitrate, but we have to fully characterize our stakeholders on the dynamics that they have, and it was only from Ate Isa that what states aim for is more aligned to what the general mass wants, whether they are alive or dead, which is fairer under the dead, that they might not be agreeing with that when they were back in the past. But as we traverse the progress we harness in society, it's the most reasonable thing to do in trying to forward a collective moral that's more favorable to everyone. I'll clinch first OG and what was their main contention, and then the opposition team. OG raised the concerns on prioritizing the living and how the money and organ that are in possession of the dead will be better distributed when there's a diversity of who they will be handed to that will resolve inequality in society. Well, they lack the analysis why the dead is or should be responsible for it, because opposition can just say it's dodging accountability. But to be more engaging under CG, we said how on all types of dead, whether they're just ordinary citizens or one of the Ayalas who own malls in society, we still believe it doesn't deserve legal protection, because under the idea that the best arbiter that are the people who can see it or experience things in the present, the active and urgent response to the needs of the people in society will better be solved when you shift the collective moral of society to not be so hyper fixated with what the dead wants, but what's the most reasonable thing to do, which the dead could no longer weigh. That's why we differ from our opening, because we don't just demonize certain sectors of society. But let's talk about CO, because before I deal with OO, what was their main contention? Because David came in with the idea that this entrenches inequality. David built upon the idea of corruption, because they claim how the vast majority is still controlled by the elites, that they can dictate who can better use it. But the legal protection is for the vulnerable. This exemption will only give an upper hand to the rich people. State is far less productive in using money, as they said. My problem with this claim is that it's so worst case, but they never do anything to solve inequality on their end, because there's no active methods of destabilizing them. This is where a lot more people will be protecting the rich, because the rich have all the legal aspect to protect their ability to own properties, which they would still enjoy to them for the rest of their lives. But they also told you about dead people having rights, and how you can retroactively put it to them. I think they have this claim of the people having rights because they're a person. We're only exempting this part of them because the way this decision making are done are no longer the same when you're alive, that you can't be prosecuted for that bad decision or be celebrated for a good one. But because there's a sense to have more impact on the people that's alive now, or how the state is currently structured, you're likely to have a better way of managing these properties or organs, because the people know what's needed to be done in the present, which already merits the retrospective actively of people having the debate. But let's clinch the best case and worst case, because I intend to weigh this on who can best arbitrate in terms of the crucial context of society in the present. The most important thing is the idea of the shifting or changes in society. Most often than not, the extent of opposition that the decision making of the dead is better, we question, because these wills are irreversible sometimes when they died already, so having no room for changes that cannot already be relevant to the present. We don't want to only paint this only on the worst case, which both opening did, because even if it's favorable in how this person is a good person, the people that was left by the dead no longer have to be subjected to something that's unreasonable on both ends, because now we're better in weighing the things in terms of objectively looking at not what the dead wants, but what needed to be done in order to reinforce the government's way to assert themselves on the ground. Before I'll accept a POI. Opening.
Even in your deathbed, you can always change and retract your will. So why is that a value in this debate?
Because that's the idea. Not all people die in their bed, or they know if their death is coming, because more often than not, this all already weaved, and at the end of the day, it's still irreversible. The needs of the people on the ground that will be left out by these properties will still needed to be accommodated. But let's talk about OO then. We're grateful for Brian's clarification with how it happens for the dead when there's no legal protection, that the state will be the one to arbitrate everything, which already reframed the debate. I think they paint how the importance of decision making of the dead who prepared when this was about them exerting their agency to be giving their properties to the people they want, and not just be subjected by structures of society. They have this huge problem upon same-sex couples, which is a harm for people, but on their side, they're bound to not solve anything because the legal protection is enough. Because if that's the case, we have to create structural reforms, and we reinforce that better, because now there's a collective clamor about it and not just be enough for that. Most of the time when these are protected, they're taking literally and cannot even be flexible, that I will posit that Brian will likely be more susceptible to the murders or conflicts between families when we follow it, because some siblings wasn't even given a property. The rigidness and irreversibility of these wishes constitutes more harms to a society. They've never proven their instructive structure to change or to lobby for change at that. It's so bad for them that they only said that the agency of opposition is already enough to prove what we have to protect, what the dead wants. Always a bit unfair, and just debating on the same context as most social legal motion that that legal protection is the best safety net when they never even clinch who's the most vulnerable from them. There's no middle analysis to what's their priority, why the dead wants is a priority wants. Conversely, with Ate Isa building, the world is better off when we're not held on the throat by the people who are already dead, and how it's more reasonable to constitute these people upon a structure that's favorable for everyone, because if it's oppressive, it will be changed. But then their idea of consent and bodily autonomy only applies when you know how the consequences of your actions is something you're well aware of, or you'll be affected by it. The dead no longer sees the aftermaths of the decision, so they can't be sanctioned for that, but they also won't be impacted, which we don't need to protect them from that. Very proud to propose. Thanks.
Thanks, Government Whip. To finally close the round, Opposition Whip, you're here.
Hello, I'll take POIs in chat. Imagine if in your final hour, when you lay crippled in your deathbed, that you learn that your family plans to burn down your work, to sell your company, to strip you of your organs, damn you to hell, and sacrifice you to some dark god. Not only would you be horrified, as I think any of us would, we say that your ability to enjoy your rights in the remaining time you have left, that's to say, to access your rights while you are alive in the first place, is fundamentally deleted. And in order to protect that, we need to protect the wishes of the dead. That is the basic principle case we bring you from David, and is the clearest reason to give us the win in this round. I want to talk about three things. First, where rights come from and why the dead deserve them. Second, utilitarian outcomes, why organ snatching and state authoritarianism aren't actually good things, contrary to GovBench. And finally, how this affects the quality of life of the dying person while they are alive and the people around them, because they are most proximate. Before any of that, I want to make very clear, this is not a debate about setting a 100% inheritance tax or making organ donations mandatory. Not only does GovBench have no fiat to assert that those things can happen, they also cannot win the debate even if they prove that they do. Just because some social outcomes would be better achieved if we did these things doesn't mean that you can waive every single legal protection the dead have. So you might individually prove that we can waive the right to property or waive the rights to their organs. That doesn't mandate, or that doesn't equate to the removal of every legal protection that is in the motion, even the most deeply individual and personal, which is why none of the Gov case thus far meets the threshold necessary to meet their burden. Let's firstly talk about where these rights come from and why the dead deserve them, because this is a prerequisite to any utilitarian outcomes in the round. The few initial claims we hear from OG, that you need to be able to appreciate your rights, that you need to be able to give back to the state, etc., are all defeated by the simple observation I make in a POI, which is that we give rights to plenty of people who fall outside of these standards all the time. They then pivot and say, well, it's about humanity, and dead people aren't human because they are no longer alive. First, this is incredibly subjective. Who determines where that humanity comes from? They don't explain it, and they don't explain why it's explicitly tied to life. I would point out that in many cultures and many religions, the dead are seen as having equal humanity. Even in Catholicism, we talk about the spirit, the soul, things that are intangible all the time. Insofar as this is something the state cannot arbitrate for itself because it crosses over the fundamental views that individuals have, they have no right to accept these legal protections. And but even if we could, it doesn't explain why you remove all legal protections from them. So sure, maybe if a dead person is less alive or less human than someone who's currently alive, they lose the right to vote, they lose speech because they can't talk. That doesn't explain why they lose the right to property or why they lose the right to an afterlife. The second response to this is it's unclear why you need to be alive or human to have rights. Place. We give animals rights, we give corporations rights, we give organizations rights. None of these things have the potential to become human, but we recognize they have rights because the impacts of their actions affect people who are alive and affect many people on the ground, as we say. Clearly, so none of the metrics they give prove the existence of rights, neither do the metrics we hear coming from OO. The analysis that wins the clash here is David's extension, which gives you two independent proofs of these rights. First, he explains that dead people deserve the protection of their human dignity because those rights aren't tied to life. Things like religious rights, things like your property, things like the value of your work that still exists even if you die, if you put all of it into a company and that thing still exists. But second, we explain that your treatment upon death impacts your ability to access your rights while alive. And I want to note, what we hear from CG implicitly concedes this when they acknowledge the pain of regret of having to overwrite a dead person's will, or when that will isn't met. So even if your standard is that these these rights are tied to human life and you can only enjoy your rights while alive. We explain why you're less able to enjoy your rights if you don't know and you don't have the security of what happens to you in death, which is why neither Gov Team's case stands. I'll take the POI from opening for engagement.
Even if sadness exists when you were alive, you can still find ways to alleviate these feelings. So these feelings are not more important than physical and concrete benefits, like the heart that keeps me alive, because you need the heart to have any of these feelings. Our benefit is intellectually prior.
Tell me, how do you alleviate the feelings of knowing that you will be eternally damned? How do you alleviate the feelings of knowing that you're in knowing that your family wants to disown you and that your life's work is gone? I don't know how you plan to alleviate those feelings, but many people cannot. I don't think it's an impact you can brush aside. Secondly, then, on utilitarian outcomes. Why is organ snatching and state authoritarianism not a good thing? There are several preconditions to the Gov case being met. So even if you assume that they get all their impacts, there are a couple of steps that they haven't taken. The first step they haven't taken is to explain why the state has both the incentive and capacity to redistribute well. Even in their best case, where the state isn't run by the people who lobby as they say, if your healthcare system is broken and you steal a Jehovah's Witness's organs, not only have you damned him to hell, you aren't really saving any more people. So without the ability to show that the state in all instances has the capacity to do this and carry this out well, just by continuing their logic, you can't believe that they get this impact, which means the harm is prior. But even then, we explained from many reasons coming from David why you can't believe this case, why the elite are still the people in the vast majority of instances will be controlling the state. Just because they don't have inheritance doesn't mean they no longer have corporations, they no longer have their fingers in the pockets of congressmen and can still direct that wealth to where they want. The second thing they fail to explain here is why those utilitarian outcomes outweigh rights in the first place. And we explain that they never do, which is why we don't just take organs from any brain-dead patient we want. We don't forbid anyone from ever having private property, even if, in like a purely utilitarian sense, we think that anything they earn or anything they work for would do more good for a poor person if we redistributed it to them. We don't, there's no reasoning coming from them why your obligation to society is always first and foremost, especially when there is a clear moral harm to yourself that you can protect yourself from. But crucially, we flip this from David to no response from CG. If the most social good comes from the redistribution of wealth, and that's what matters, we explain very simply that there will be far less wealth for you to redistribute if the rich know they can't control how their wealth is spent. They will give it to their children. They will buy properties for them. They will set it aside and ask state cannot touch, where otherwise, where they did have control, they would give it to a charity they deeply care about because that didn't require them to trust the arms of the state. So even on utilitarian outcomes, we win. Finally, very quickly, how does this affect the quality of life of a person while they're alive? And I want to note, if you aren't convinced that the state and gov bench becomes perfectly benevolent and completely efficient at redistribution, then what you weigh on is the certain impacts of the people around the person who is dying and the people around them. We explain very simply, first, that they will be plunged into despair in their final days and have no ability to come back from that. But second, that funerals are messy affairs. If your problem is that family fighting over your will makes you sad, imagine what happens when there isn't a will to guide them and how much slower, more delayed the process of getting donations to those people is, or redistributing the wealth is, when every child in the family has a lawyer that competes for them. This is fundamentally unjust. We support the right to live your life with dignity.
Thank you so much, opposition rep. So that ends the round. You guys can virtually cross the house. Please proceed to the convening room for the decision. Can I request all panelists to proceed to the deliberation room then?